Floyd's top 15 greatest albums of all time. Starting off at number 15, we have A Momentary Lapse of Reason. Possibly my least favorite of the Floyd albums, but I don't think there is a bad Floyd album. The reason this would be lower on my list is because they brought in a lot of professional writers to basically make a more commercial sounding Floyd album. The next three albums on this list are all soundtracked albums. And it was on these albums that Roger Waters kind of came into his own as a lyricist and formed a path that they would follow in later years. Originally, Pink Floyd did all of the music for this album, but the director, Michelangelo Antonioni, decided against it because he wanted more of an American feel because it was dealing with the American counterculture. So he only used 3 Pink Floyd songs. Luckily, years later when the album was reissued, a lot of the unused Floyd material found its way into release, especially the country song which you're hearing in the background. At number 13, we have Obscured by Clouds. It consisted of music that Pink Floyd made for the film La Valley. And here we have Roger Waters' lyrics really coming into their own. Writing most of the songs on this album, except for maybe Childhood's End, which is actually one of David Gilmour's best songs that he had ever written. In the background you're hearing Free 4, which really foreshadows things to come. At number 12, you have Soundtrack to the Film More. This was the first album that Roger Waters wrote all of the lyrics to, and you definitely see a songwriter evolving, the highlight being Green is the color that you're listening to in the background. At number 11, you have the album Ummagumma. Ummagumma was Pink Floyd's first double album, and the live side of this makes it worthwhile in itself. For the first time, you hear Dave singing Astronomy to Mine, and you have one of the best versions of Careful with That Axe, Eugene. But the experimental side, you had all 4 band members kind of taking their own little piece and seeing where they could go with it. The highlights being Roger Waters' 2 compositions, Several Species of Small Furry Animals Gathered Together in a Cave and Grooving with a Pick, which he had help with a man named Ron Geeson, who would go on to make considerable contributions to Atom Heart Mother and to also do a solo album with Roger called The Body. The other song that you're hearing in the background is Grantchester Meadows, and Grantchester Meadows really foreshadowed where Roger would go with his writing. There is a live version they did when they came to the US in the early 70s from San Francisco, filmed on PBS. That is the definitive version of this, with Roger and Dave both singing different parts. At number 10, we have Atom Heart Mother. And what I love most about this is you have Rick, Roger, and Dave really writing 3 strong songs. So better than Ummagumma in that sense, because all 3 of them wrote some of their best material up to that point. And you also have one whole side consisting of the Atom Heart Mother Suite, which they did with Ron Geeson, who kind of formulated a lot of their ideas that would be used later on subsequent albums. At number 9, we have The Final Cut. Pretty much a Roger Waters solo album by this point. Rick had quit, Nick had minimal contributions to this album, and Dave only sings one song, Not Now John, which was released as a single but is kind of my least favorite song on the album. With all that considered, there are so many great songs on this album that if Roger would have let Dave come in and do some more vocals, it would have been just as good as The Wall. A lot of these songs were outtakes from The Wall, and if you like that album, this one is definitely worth checking out. At number 8, we have The Division Bell, which was definitely a step in the right direction for Dave and co. Another album without Roger, but better than A Momentary Lapse of Reason, because you had Polly Sampson writing lyrics for Pink Floyd for the first time, and Roger's were always more poetic. Now you have a switch over to Polly Samson writing more prose, and I think it was a step in the right direction. You also have Rick Wright coming back in, writing a lot of the music, and you still had the Bob Ezrin production coming into a lot of these songs, so it's definitely interesting and definitely worth checking out. At number 7, you have the turning point for Pink Floyd. In a lot of their interviews, they count Metal as where everything started to kind of come together. You have the one side suite, similar to Adam Hart Mother, called Echoes, but you have Roger writing some of the best lyrics of his life. You have the other side consisting of songs such as One of These Days I'm Going to Cut You Into Little Pieces and Fearless, which foreshadowed things to come. At number 6, you have A Saucer Full of Secrets, one of the most underrated Pink Floyd albums of all time. It started off with Syd Barrett almost as kind of a murder mystery. You had the original opening song, Vegetable Man, where you had multiple voices, people coming in, no real direction as to who Pink Floyd was. The second song on the album, you had Rick Wright doing vocals. Third song on the album, you had Roger Waters doing vocals. And the fourth song on the album, you had Nick Mason doing the vocals. Well, when Syd left and Roger took over, he kept a lot of these same themes. You have Let There Be More Light replacing the first song and still keeping with the theme of multiple voices at once. You have Rick Wright and Roger Waters still doing their same songs that would have been on the original. And you have Nick Mason singing a Roger Waters penned song called Corporal Clegg about Roger Waters' father's experience in World War II. At number 5, you have Animals. Animals was kind of Pink Floyd at their peak. They did a world tour selling out stadiums. Culture was changing at that time where suddenly you had these huge shows and Pink Floyd wasn't really ready for it. It affected them in a lot of ways that would lead into their subsequent albums. But with Animals, you had to move away from the more commercial aspects of Wish You Were Here and Dark Side of the Moon, going into more longer pieces such as Dogs, Pigs, and Sheep, which are all 10-minute plus songs. At number 4, you have The Wall, Roger Waters' magnum opus. Kind of stemming from the feelings he had about doing stadiums during the Animals tour. You have Bob Ezrin coming in on production, and he really affected the Pink Floyd sound, and I feel added to it because you had a back and forth between Ezrin and Waters that neither of them sounded like they really liked each other, but they created an incredible album. A lot of these songs are classic. You had Pink Floyd's first #1 single in the US, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, and the song that you're listening to in the background, Comfortably Numb. At number 3, Wish You Were Here, Roger Waters' tribute to Syd Barrett. Half of it about Syd, the other half about Pink Floyd's experience after the success of Dark Side of the Moon, and how now you suddenly had a phony world with people clamoring over how they would make them more money rather than the music and the experience that the group and the fans had felt up to that point. At number 2, you have The Dark Side of the Moon, one of the biggest selling albums in the history of recorded music. Dark Side of the Moon, I know, was on the Billboard album charts when it was released in '73. I don't think it went off until the late '80s and then reappeared. But it kind of brought Roger's whole ideas, Roger and something that Syd had started about dealing with the I Ching and the man and the journey. You have the first side of Dark Side of the Moon going through the history of a life ending in a death. You have the second side of Dark Side of the Moon kind of dealing with different ailments, going into corruption with money, war with us and them, and closing off with insanity. And the last song, Eclipse, kind of leading you back to the beginning. At number 1, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, Syd Barrett's classic album as the leader of Pink Floyd, the only full album that he contributed to, but definitely worth checking out. And there are so many things to discover, double entendres, metaphors, so much symbolism in this album that Roger would use often in later years.
To the sun, young cat, always sitting by your side, always by your side. That cat's something